we have heard from two people mention of Etihad. Let's talk about that for a second. The Crown Prince is head of the Aviation Authority. The Crown Prince is head of the airline. The Crown Prince runs the airport, and the government is dumping massive amounts of money into a losing proposition. And it isn't just that they're providing service to parts of the world that were underserved. They're flying planes empty to places like Milan, Italy, and using their fifth freedom right to come across the Atlantic. Simple question. Do you think we should allow a state-owned enterprise in a monarchy, dictatorship? Do you think that's fair competition for our airlines? Just because you get a little bit off the ticket? Yeah. Yes or no, Mr. Leocha? You think it's fair?
Well, if what you
yes or no?
If what you're saying is true,
yes,
no.
it is true. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't
thank
know.
Thank you, Mr. Tilden.
Okay.
Microphone. So do you want to be ultimately competing with, I mean, you want to partner with a state-owned enterprise, but what happens if a state-owned enterprise starts competing with you?
What I'd say about this, Alaska Airlines is a domestic airline operating in the U.S. We have treaties with these other countries.
I know,
that
but do you think the United States of America should have policies that require our capitalist, privately owned companies to compete with state-owned enterprises from dictatorships that are being financed in that manner?
I think every country in the world sets up their airline industry a little differently.
All right, so you're not going to say.
Well, what I'll say is that all these airlines should be required to comply with the treaties. I do believe that.
Yeah, well, I don't think the treaty, most of our trade policy is a failure, and that's another example of it. Now, we just had a panel last week, Mr. Leocha, of airports talking about their needs. You're opposed to an increase in the passenger facility charge. Now, I'll give you an example. Denver was in to see me. They are doing everything they can, including a P3, to redo their main terminal, which needs to be redone to, tremendously facilitate the movement of passengers through security, and also will provide a much more shopping environment, all that kind of stuff. So they're using P3s. They've got a PFC. They're bonded out. You're saying they shouldn't be allowed to increase their PFC, but they have a dire need to extend their terminals to accommodate additional traffic so people won't be sitting on the ground waiting to get to a gate. So you're just saying you're against PFC increases no matter how well they're merited?
I'm saying that we don't need PFC increases. There are other ways to increase the money for the airport.
Excuse me, sir, but they are using a P3. They're getting a huge benefit from that. They are charging the airlines fees. They are doing everything else. And the question is, at some point, you're bonded out. And what are you going to do when you're bonded out? Now, I was the Democratic author of PFCs because I use the Eugene Airport. Eugene had to do municipal bonds to expand the airport. I didn't pay a cent. I don't live in Eugene. Now, you're just saying, well, the municipality benefits, and I live in the next town over, which you can hardly distinguish, but I shouldn't pay anything.
Those are questions which need to be raised by the localities, the municipalities.
Well, I raised them 20 years ago when we established a PFC, which I think is the fairest way to have a user fee-based system. And there are all sorts of restrictions on the PFCs. There are no abuses of PFCs. It is all benefiting the flying public. So I find your adamant opposition. I don't like the Greyhound bus experience, which I find in a number of airports that are constrained from making improvements, and the PFC is a fair way to make it. And in the case of Denver, a lot of those, the municipality isn't necessarily benefiting from all the people who are just changing planes in Denver, and that's what some of the terminals are targeted toward. What's the benefit there? So I just find your adamant opposition very problematic. And then finally, I did not want to get into ATC today, but if you could hold up the chart. Just again, Mr. Tilden, this is the organizational chart, because there's a little problem in privatizing in the United States of America. The Germans had to change their constitution. We're not changing ours. Right. So we prohibit private entities from doing anything that affects competition. So that means if they want to increase taxes, obviously it has to go to the secretary. If they want to change flight paths, it has to go to the Secretary. If they want to change next-gen procedures, it goes to the Secretary. If they want to change anything else regarding ATC, it has to go to the Secretary. If they decide to close an air traffic control tower, contract tower, et cetera, it has to go to the Secretary. If the Secretary disagrees, then we go to court. I don't find that to be a more efficient system, plus you're cleaving the FAA in half, and certification, which is vital to manufacturers, stays over here, and yes, we move ATO over here. I believe there are other ways to resolve long-standing issues, and I didn't really want to get into this today, but since you raised it, I had to say that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeFazio.